All right, welcome to a garage talk at the backyard of Mike Foote. And Mike Foote is bringing us a very interesting perspective on, I guess, law. We kind of got together because of Megan Hotman, who thought it would be interesting to chat about the case with Gwen Inglis, who was killed unfortunately a few weeks ago, and maybe to just kind of break down where we're going with this case from your perspective as a former DA in Boulder, but also as a state legislator. And you have some sort of backroom views of how laws obviously comes to fruition, maybe how certain laws affect this case, maybe not, but also as a DA, maybe some of the strategy that's going on in the DA's office in Jefferson County, just kind of giving us an overview. But welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. And, I can talk about different angles. I was deputy DA for a long time. I was in the Durango office for a couple years right out of law school, and in the Boulder office for about 15 years as a deputy district attorney there.
Okay.
And also a state legislator for 8 years. I was a state representative for 6 and state senator for 2. And now I do my own private law practice. I do environmental and energy law.
Okay.
So representing environmental groups and environmental causes, basically. Is
Are you 75 years old? How have you done all this?
I feel like it some days, I can tell you that.
And you obviously ride bikes too. I mean, it's not like you're
Yeah.
just, you've got the Coat to It shirt on,
Yeah.
and we talked earlier, you're on the Cinch team.
Yeah.
So you're a pretty serious cyclist.
Yeah, I've been cycling for a long time. Of course, like probably everyone that's watching this, it's my sanity.
Right?
It's how I really just get along day to day, and I love it, and I've just continued to do it. I mean, over the years I've been more or less serious. Like when I was in the legislature, I didn't have as much time to do stuff, but now that I'm out of the legislature, I have time to be consistent and ride and do a couple of races here and there. So it's been great.
So before we get into the case, if you will, tell us about being a legislator and maybe being a cyclist in the legislature, where there's things that come into the chambers that talk about road safety and distracted driving, and what are some of your, I guess, personal feelings about some of the things you saw in that time?
Yeah, well, so this is probably only a 30-minute program, so I probably can't go into a great amount of detail, but there's a lot that we can talk about.
Did you get frustrated? Was it challenging, or the things that you're just like, come on, people?
Yeah, I'll tell you what made me frustrated, particularly the nexus with bikes, is that, and the reason I think we know each other is through Megan Hotman, you mentioned. And
right.
She was someone that I worked with on a bill that I ran a couple years ago that dealt with taking away a license of somebody that was guilty of careless driving causing death to a vulnerable road user,
Yep.
including cyclists. And that it was really, I think, mostly her idea, and then I was the legislator that kind of, brought it to fruition. So we worked pretty closely together for that. But what's really frustrating in that context is, and this is also kind of what we see with a lot of criminal justice issues now in the legislature. This is just my opinion, others disagree, but we bring this bill and we basically say, look, the least that can happen if somebody kills a cyclist or a pedestrian is they lose their license for a year. I mean, that just seems like that's kind of more than fair. And but we get pushback from people saying, well, what if the person has to take their mom to the doctor, or what if they have to go to work and they can't take a bus? And it's like, what's so frustrating to me is I want to say, what about the person that they just ran over and killed?
Yeah.
And what about their family? It's mostly about, there's a lot more concern about what happens to the defendant as opposed to the victim and the victim's family. And there's good reason for that. I mean, our system, and we can talk about this a little bit, our system is designed to make sure that the defendant is presumed innocent legally and those kinds of things. But still, just from a human level, it's frustrating. I mean, along with so many other people, I've had my fair share of close calls and crazy drivers and people that just buzz by you for no good reason, or they're distracted, and you just think, look, that easily could be me that gets run over, and the least that should happen would be that they suffer some kind of a consequence for being so careless. But that was a frustrating part for me in the legislature, just knowing so many cyclists that have been affected by this. And it's somewhat of a, it's not a, I don't, the word that's coming to mind is kind of a cavalier attitude, but that's not what it is. But it comes across that way, kind of like they don't seem to care about the families of the victims. That's not the case, but it comes across that way sometimes, and you just kind of want to say, come on, what about the person that was killed, or what about their families?
Right.
that's what was frustrating to
Why?
me.
Why is it? I mean, this in this particular case we're going to talk about, it was a drunk driver or an impaired driver that we think. I don't think all the blood work has come back yet, but that seems to be the case. But it wasn't a texting driver. But I'm curious your take on why is it so hard to pass legislation that you can't text and drive, you can't hold a phone and drive? Who's pushing back against that?
Well, again, this is my opinion.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean.
And others would disagree. I think if you had someone else on the show, they would disagree. But I personally think it comes down to legislators can see themselves in that position. So if legislators are people too.
Sure. Right.
And, they want to talk and drive, or sometimes they want to text and drive. So, you come into this position where, you're being asked to legislate against something that they may want to do, or they know someone that does it, a family member does it, or whatever, and I think it makes them very uncomfortable. And so people come in and they argue against it, and the legislators are more likely to adopt that kind of an argument because I think they can see themselves doing it.
Interesting.
And so I just think that's a part of it.
Yeah.
Like I said, others may disagree, but that's just kind of my personal feeling about it. I mean, I always voted for those bills that were designed to, make it a higher penalty for texting while driving, but sometimes they were big fights and sometimes they didn't pass.
Interesting.
And I think a lot of it's because people see themselves in that position where they themselves are doing it. So it's hard.
Interesting. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Gwen Inglis was killed, about 6 weeks ago now, 8 weeks ago, and clearly not at fault. Clearly in the shoulder. This driver was impaired, that we think, just ran her over essentially. Did stop, which, okay, but let's say you're the DA, and you get that phone call that this happened. What's the first thing that happens in your world?
Well, so the DA really comes in. I mean, in a case like this, the DA will probably go and try to assist the law enforcement, the police agency that's actually investigating it.
Okay.
But typically on crimes, the DA comes in after the fact. But in a case like this, like with a vehicular homicide or a homicide, the DA will come in and see if they can offer assistance. But it's really the police agency that takes the lead in investigating, and then they investigate, and then they usually hand over the reports and all the information to the DA. And then the police officer kind of takes a step back, and the DA then kind of takes it and takes through the court system. So in this case, probably, I don't know anything about what they've done. I just know what I've read in the paper about it. But I'm assuming that the DA's office probably got a phone call, and a deputy DA was dispatched to the scene to kind of help the officers, see if they need any help with anything. And then the officers do their investigation. And then within just a couple of days, the DA has to bring charges against the defendant, and they did that in this case.
Right.
Bond was set, and then the next hearing was set at that point in time.
So the bond was kind of a point of annoyance for some people of only being $50,000, which I don't know what that really means. Like he puts up 10% or something like that.
Yeah.
$5,000, somebody, and then he's out.
Yeah.
He can go home, sit around, do whatever, until he goes to court and gets sentenced. Is that right?
Pretty much. I mean, I wouldn't say it's quite like that. I mean, certainly he's out of jail.
Yep.
I'm sure there's conditions that are attached to the bond, like alcohol monitoring, maybe an ankle monitor, to make sure the community is protected. So it's not like they're just released and just kind of like, all right, go along and make sure you come back to court, or else we'll be mad at you.
Now I heard he was not ankle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if that's not a condition, there'll at least be some kind of monitoring.
There
Like
will
at
be
least
some
have to check in or do some kind of, since DUI is charged, he'll have to do some kind of testing.
Right.
I'm not sure what that is.
Okay.
And that's designed to make sure that he doesn't go out and drink and drive again, of course. It's
Right.
for community protection, but he is out of jail. And that goes back to, in real life, we're sitting here talking about it. In real life, we know what happened, and, we presume him to be guilty, and we're allowed to do that. But in the legal system, it's the opposite.
Right.
The prosecutor has to presume him, the system has to presume him innocent until the prosecutor has proved him guilty. And so when it's a bond that's set like that, you have to keep in mind that a case like this that could go on for so long, here's someone that's presumed innocent, that could be in jail for a year and a half or 2 years, and he could be acquitted.
Right.
And so you have to kind of look at it from that perspective, from the system. But many times the legal system, the way it works is different than the way you and I would talk about, and the way that most people think about it. But that's just the way the system is set up.
So this DA, there's 2 charges of manslaughter. I think one is for impairment, and one is, I guess, just vehicular manslaughter. So why the 2 charges, and what's the strategy maybe moving forward? I assume there's usually some negotiating, plea bargaining. Do you try to pile as much on as possible so that you can take away as little as possible, or what's the strategy as the DA?
Well, so I've seen the charging document, and as you said, there's 2 vehicular homicide charges that are the top charges. One is for DUI, and the other is for reckless driving.
Okay.
So if it's reckless driving and you kill somebody, then it's vehicular homicide, but that's a felony level 4, that's a little lower level. If it's DUI and you kill somebody, then that's a felony level 3, which is a higher level. So, and then there's a number of charges that are also on there, like the careless driving causing death to a vulnerable road user, and passing too close on the left, and traffic charges like that. But clearly the ones that are important are the vehicular homicide ones. So I think you asked, what happens next, right?
Yeah.
And what is the DA doing? Clearly the DA in any case, particularly a case like this, will be making sure that the police reports are all in good order, that they're getting the evidence that they need, that there's any questions that are being asked, any further investigation that needs to be done, interviews. They're going to have to wait, if they haven't gotten it back already, for the toxicology test. And that takes some time to come back. And that's going to be a very important piece of evidence. I mean, the toxicology test, what it shows, could kind of make or break the DUI aspect of it. I mean, if it's alcohol, everyone kind of knows what the numbers are, and what somebody becomes, they're impaired or they're drunk at certain numbers. But if it's drugs like marijuana or cocaine or meth or whatever, then the levels are, it's easier for the defense to argue that they weren't impaired, or if it's marijuana that was already in the system but he wasn't actually high at the time. And so that could be a lot more complicated if those tests come back at certain numbers. So of course, we haven't seen that, so we don't really know what it looks like. But so that's going to be in order. There's going to be expert testimony that the district attorney has to secure and kind of make sure that he or she understands what's going on with that, and really the state of the evidence. And then once that person really can evaluate the evidence, I think then they'll come up with a game plan about how to go forward with the case. Now in our system here in Colorado, the vast majority of cases don't go to trial. They come to some kind of an agreement with the defense attorneys about what both of them think, I guess, is fair, a way to get rid of the case or to plead it out. I don't know if that's going to happen here, but part of the considerations that come into play are the state of the evidence, and if what the DA thinks.
When you say state of the evidence, do you mean the quality of the evidence, the preponderance of the evidence?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether or not the DA thinks that there can be, a good chance of conviction, or is there a really good chance that they won't get a conviction, and maybe it's time to try to get a conviction to a lesser charge in order to get a conviction to something. I mean, that's what's going to be going through their head.
So where does if you're a DA and you're a cyclist, I'm assuming that might play into your maybe aggressiveness to go after this case, versus maybe if this case was handed off to a DA that is not a cyclist, maybe isn't as empathetic to that community. Where does that play into these decisions on what to do?
Everybody's different. That's the thing about our system, is every DA is different. Now, the district attorney himself or herself, of course, they set kind of the tone for the office, and they may set some kind of guidelines. The elected DA. So it could be, I think in some offices, cycling-related offenses or vehicle homicides on cyclists are treated very seriously, and others, the elected DA, may not treat them as seriously. And so sometimes it comes from the top.
Okay.
But also the individual prosecutor, you're right. I mean, the individual prosecutor, they may feel pretty strongly about it because they're a part of that community, or they really sympathize with the victim's family or something like that. It's really hard to say, in this individual case, how that's going to go down. But at the end of the day, the elected DA, through the deputies and the chief deputies, have a lot of discretion about what to
That's
do.
what it sounds
with
like.
the case.
I mean, so where can the public influence that, or do they? I mean,
yeah, well, they can through the elected.
yeah,
And the elected DA is elected like any other elected official, and so part of their job is to take public comments and hear from the public, those that are in their jurisdiction in particular in Jefferson County, and they're supposed to be, like any elected official, they're supposed to be responsive to that. At least they're supposed to be listening to it. It's a little different with the elected district attorney because there's the evidence concerns and ethical concerns about bringing a case forward. That's different than being a legislator, for example, because you're not prosecuting a case. So it's a little bit different there. But at any rate, the elected DA is a public official, and they're supposed to be taking public comment about cases. And so for those that want to try to affect the outcome, their best opportunity, I think, would be to contact the elected district attorney. But I think to be most effective, don't just say, hey, throw the book at him, period. I mean, kind of talk about why it matters to you, talk about why it's really important to the cycling community for whatever outcome you're advocating for, and why this really has affected you. And I think the more thoughtful the kind of message that is conveyed, I think the more effective it will be. That's just human nature. But
how about the judges?
Judges, no. I mean,
because they're elected, some are.
Yeah, that's a little different, but judges aren't going to. Well, so let me back up. First of all, judges don't have any role in it other than to make sure that the proceedings are fair.
Got it.
Unless there's a conviction, like if the prosecutor proves the case and there's a conviction, then the judge sentences the defendant.
Got it.
Okay, but the judge isn't going to take any kind of public comment about the case as it's going on, because the judge's role is not to decide what happens with the case. That's up to the DA.
Got it. Okay.
And so now when it comes to sentencing, I think there's room for public comment there, but the most effective is probably to go through the DA in order to make sure there's public comment. Or, of course, showing up to the court proceedings, I think, is helpful, because then everybody knows the community cares. To the extent people can show up now, I'm not sure what's happening in Jeffco with COVID, but to the extent people can show up, I think that makes an impression. At least lets the judge know the community cares. It lets the prosecutor know the community cares, and all the participants know that they care. And when it comes time, if there's a conviction, when it comes time for sentencing, then there is kind of a limited opportunity for public comment. But best to try to work through the DA in order to make sure that they're doing it the right way.
So the DA is really the quarterback.
Yep.
And so there was a hearing 2 weeks ago now that was like 30 seconds long, and they just moved to August.
Yeah.
And I guess I think maybe partly because I don't think they had the blood toxicology out.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why, I don't know exactly. But things get moved around pretty easily. That's like normal stuff, right?
Yeah. Totally normal. A case like this won't be resolved for another year.
And talk about some of the steps in that year. When is Derek Chauvin was just sentenced yesterday, right? Or Friday.
And that was a quick case.
It seemed kind of quick, right?
Yeah. For that kind of case, that was super quick.
Is that because of the magnitude of it and the national media attention on it?
Well, so probably. I think from the prosecutor's perspective, the case never gets better as time goes on. From the defense perspective, they want to drag it out because as time goes on, witnesses move, they lose their memory, whatever the case may be. So, but I presume in the Chauvin case, the prosecutors did their best to really push it forward as quickly as possible. And in homicide cases and vehicular homicide cases, I think prosecutors try to do that too, because they want to get it to trial, if it in fact goes to trial and doesn't plead out. So it's really, I think, in the prosecution's interest to try to push it along, but the system only goes so fast. This is the preliminary hearing will be next, if it even happens. The defendant can waive the preliminary hearing.
What does that mean? What is a preliminary hearing?
That's just kind of a gatekeeper. They call
tells them what?
It's a probable cause hearing, meaning that there's probable cause, which is a low standard for the case to go forward as charged.
Okay.
So they should get probable cause in this case. So that shouldn't be that
there's
big
a witness,
of a deal.
her husband, right? So
yeah,
it seems like it's a no-brainer that. So then, what happens after that?
After that, then it goes, and then there's probably a number of resets. But eventually, if it gets set for trial, then it'll go to a motions hearing, where they'll probably have some kind of motions about statements that were made or searches that were done. The defense will try to get some of those thrown out. That's pretty standard. happens in almost every case. And then other kind of procedural motions, or this kind of evidence should be heard or this shouldn't be heard, things like that. And then ultimately it gets set and it goes to the trial. But like I said, I'd be really surprised if it happened anytime within a year after the crash occurred. I mean, that would be really quick. It'd be more like about 18 months would be my best guess.
So what would be your best guess of minimum and maximum charges that he'll end up actually being sentenced for?
Well, if he's convicted as charged, then
I guess all of them.
Yeah, he could be convicted of everything, and the highest charge is the vehicular homicide DUI,
Okay.
which is a felony level 3.
Which is, so what's a felony level 1? A murder?
Yeah, 1 is the highest. That's murder, premeditated murder.
Okay.
And then F2 is, like there's organized crime things that are in F2, like, economic crimes. Colorado Organized Crime Act will be in the F2 range.
Okay.
F3s are things like these vehicular homicides, or a really expensive theft would be in F3 range.
Okay.
F4 is vehicular homicide but reckless driving, so that's 1 level lower. And those are pretty garden variety type of felonies, so other types of thefts.
So for him, a 3 versus a 4 is a massive difference.
The difference in sentencing would be if you're convicted of an F3, then it's a presumptive range, meaning like if you go to prison, it's 4 to 12 years.
Okay.
F4, the range is 2 to 6.
Okay.
So it makes a big difference as far as that goes. But again, prison isn't in this case mandatory, so the judge could sentence him to some kind of probation instead.
It's not mandatory.
Mm-mm.
Really? That's so incredible.
Yeah, it's I think the sentence is way too light for something like this, personally.
Yeah.
And I know that there's talk of trying to advocate for change for that in the legislature, which is where the change would probably come from.
But even if something happened between, like, it sort of reverts back to the time of the crime, correct? Or could legislation change and change his?
No,
right?
It wouldn't change his particular circumstance.
Right.
But going forward, unfortunately, these vehicular homicides happen a lot more than, 1 is too many, but it happens a lot more than people think.
Right. Yeah, Gwen was unfortunately, just so well thought of and known, and has gotten people so motivated to be involved and angry, and I think that's the hard part for the community right now, is there's so much anger, but there's not much we can do.
Yeah.
And
well, that's true. Other than try to advocate for change in many ways. Of course, it's about education, distracted driving, don't be DUI driver, but also, like I said, I know that there's people that are discussing trying to do some kind of legal change about the sentence range to try to make something come out of it. So, but yeah, that's true. The case is kind of right now in the system, and there's not much the general public can really do about it at this point in time.
So my understanding is he had a prior conviction of impaired driving. What is that going to mean in terms of potential outcome for this case?
I think it'll affect his sentencing if he is convicted.
Yeah.
Especially if he's convicted of the felony.
Yeah.
Or one of the felonies. And so, like I said, prison's not mandatory, but if you have a prior, then that's going to be a huge strike against him in the judge's eyes, I think, for the sentencing. So I think that will matter. A lot of things will matter if it comes to a sentencing, of course. What the family has to say will matter. The circumstances of the crime will matter. His prior criminal history will matter. Also, of course, he'll come to the judge with his best face on, with all the, they always talk about their family commitments. They're, the sole breadwinner of something. It's always something about how they should be allowed to be in the community. That's just the argument that they'll make.
Unfortunately, it's been, as you probably know, several cases where there's been a hit and run, and this was not, because he did stop, which is like, it's like he's getting false congratulations for stopping.
Yeah.
Is that going to affect his sentencing, do you think?
It could. It's kind of hard, like you're touching on. It's like he did the right thing by stopping. He did the wrong thing by being a DUI driver.
Right.
So, but we've had kind of so many of these cases where cyclists get hit and the driver just takes off.
Right.
So I would imagine he probably will get some kind of, credit for that.
Yeah.
It certainly would be a lot better. It's a lot better for him that he stopped as opposed to getting caught later.
Yeah.
Assuming he would have gotten caught if he didn't stop. So yeah, I mean that will probably be something that the defense would bring up in mitigation of the offense. But you know the result of what he did is so tragic, and the fact that he has a prior is also a really bad strike against him. So, but that's where the judge is really going to play a role, because that's at the end of the day, that's if it goes to trial and there's a conviction, the judge is really the one that weighs all of those factors and comes up with what the judge thinks is an appropriate sentence.
How about as a DA? We'll even say a friendly cycling DA, because you are. What would be your like personal feeling of burden to make this happen? Like, you know, your community, you're a cyclist, you've got this prominent cyclist who was killed. How much pressure is that on you as a DA?
Yeah, that was definitely a hard part about being a DA. There's certain cases, I mean, you try to distance yourself from the cases because otherwise you just go insane.
Yeah.
But there's some cases that you can't. I had probably a handful of cases where I really kind of internalized it, and it really, after a while, it kind of, you know, it's tough. It's really tough. And so this would be the kind of case probably that if I was working the case, I would internalize. So that has advantages and disadvantages, because if you internalize it, then, you know, sometimes you can't look at it objectively and try to figure out how this is really going to play out at trial. Mm-hmm. But also it has advantages because that means you're really going to fight for it, and you fight for the victim's family. So, you know, so it could go either way, I suppose, in a case like that. But really, any time that there's a death, it's so tragic that, you know, I would think that the DA's office in general should be paying a lot of attention to it and giving a lot of attention. You know, I just haven't been involved, so
Sure.
I don't know. But I would have to assume and give them the benefit of the doubt that they are.
What kind of pressure did you feel? You were a deputy DA?
Yeah.
What kind of pressure did you feel, maybe either, you know, really directly or indirectly from the elected DA to sort of mitigate or go through certain cases in terms of politics and the person's leaning? How did that affect you to do your job?
Yeah, well, like so many, I always say this, but you know, everyone's different.
Yeah.
And every elected district attorney is different in how they, you know, their policies in the office. Now, from my experience, when you were prosecuting a serious case like a homicide or a vehicular homicide, of course the district attorney was really paying attention, very close attention to it, and asking you about it, and the office was paying attention to it. So, you know, there's pressure because you want to do it right for the family and the community, but man, you don't want to screw it up either because the district attorney is watching. And so there's definitely that aspect to it. When you say political, I don't really think it's kind of political. It's more just, it's like any other job where the boss is very interested in the outcome, and you're on the hook. You know, you're the person that's supposed to make the outcome happen. And so if it doesn't happen the way that the boss wants it or the way that you want it, then, you know, there's a lot of pressure to try to make that happen.
Is there any part of that made you want to get into the civil world and get out of being a DA?
Well, there's complications there.
Yeah.
I mean, the DA work is very good work, but for me, I'd been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I also had this other passion of environmental protection.
Okay.
And working to try to affect climate change and make sure that our beautiful state can stay beautiful instead of half the state burning every year because of drought,
Right.
because of climate change. And
Right.
you know, I love riding my bike up in the mountains. I love hiking. I love being outdoors, and just I've been here since 1999 when I came out to law school, and I've seen it change so much during that period of time.
Right.
And you know, I don't want to tell my kids someday that Colorado used to look like this beautiful state, and now it's kind of this burnt out, you know, state that used to be so beautiful. And so I've really wanted to work in this climate area, in this environmental area, and so that's what I'm doing now. But the DA job is a very fulfilling job, and it's an important job. And you know, there's a lot of people that do it for just a few years, but there's also a lot of people that do it for their entire careers, and they do good work.
Does a case like this get you at all want to get back into it a little bit?
No, I'm very committed to what I'm doing now. You know, so like, you know, there was a lot of DAs.
A guest appearance, like.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I've been out of it for 3 years. I guess it's been it's been since 2018.
Okay.
Really, 2017 was the last time that I was in court as a DA. And and I'm not doing hardly anything in that area anymore,
Yeah.
and so it's pretty easy to kind of just get out of the groove. And like anything, once you're not doing it every day, then you're not really. I wouldn't be nearly as effective as I would have been back in 2017 to step back into it. So no, I don't think about that. And plus, I really like what I'm doing now, so I'm quite happy with what I'm doing.
That's awesome. Do you get involved with any advocacy in the community and trying to make roads safer from another aspect of whether it's an organization, maybe like a Cyclists for Community or Bike Jeffco or?
Yeah, so I've been involved a little bit with Bicycle Colorado.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, not a ton. Like But I'm a part of the organization and I support what they do. And particularly when I was in the legislature, I was always looked to them to try to figure out what's something we can do for cyclists and try to make sure we can advance the cause there.
Yeah.
Since then, it hasn't been quite as focused on bike advocacy and more of just environmental advocacy. And so, I do a lot of work in that area, and still, of course, participate in bike races.
Yeah. How do you feel as a cyclist right now in terms of your own safety? And I mean, I know myself. I have to admit, I've gotten a little more skittish. I'm more picky on my routes and when I ride. And how about you? How do you feel?
Yeah, same way. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm into gravel now, and a lot of there's lots of reasons I love it. But one of the main reasons is there's hardly any traffic.
Right.
So I don't have to worry about that. Or if I'm going out with a friend or two friends, we can ride two abreast without getting people honking their horns at us all the time or
Right.
buzzing us or whatever, getting pissed off because we just want to be social and talk. So I love the gravel aspect because of that. And I'm definitely more careful about where I go. And I mean, it's been somewhat because of Gwen, but also there's been other tragedies before that where you read about it here in Boulder County. Yeah, and so I've been more careful, with my routes, and in the summertime I go out super early, partially because I want to get my ride in before work, but also because there's just less traffic out there. So stuff like that, I've made those adjustments.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer, right?
Yeah, but I still love riding my bike.
I know, right? It's hard not to.
I still want to do it. I don't want to give it up.
No, I don't either. I don't plan to.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel generally pretty safe, but occasionally there's just that.
Yeah.
It's just you got to be a little smarter, I think.
And the thing that there's many things that hit me about what happened with Gwen, but one of them was that she was doing everything right.
Exactly.
And that happens with so many of these cases where they're doing everything right. It's the driver that's completely in the wrong. So it's just wrong place at the wrong time, doing everything right, but still something tragic happens, and that's hard.
Well, okay, we can finish up soon, but what would the defense say here? I mean, what would they? I mean, we had a witness. He clearly went. I mean, he was totally wrong. What is the defense going to try to do?
Yeah, well, so probably the defense strategy in this case is about mitigation and trying to keep him out of prison. That's my best guess.
Yeah.
Like I said, I haven't talked to anyone that's doing this case. So in that case, if that's what you want to do, then you try to do what you can to make sure that the DUI, the vehicular homicide DUI, doesn't stick.
Okay.
Which really comes down to the toxicology. It comes down to the test. So there could be some kind of ambiguity about how impaired he was, and
Right.
that's what they would really go after.
So that test is super critical.
Yeah, super critical.
So if that comes back not so impaired,
Right.
then now we've got to fight.
That's going to matter.
It's going to matter.
Yeah.
I would think that's coming back soon. I don't know how long those take, but
Yeah, it seems about right. The state lab is completely overwhelmed, of
Right.
course, just like so many government agencies.
Right.
But for vehicular homicide, I would guess 6 weeks would be about right.
okay. Well, maybe I'll ring your phone when we get that information, and you can help me understand it a little bit. But it seems like it's going pretty much how you would think it would go if you were outside looking in.
No surprises so far.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for kind of walking us through a little bit of what may happen. We obviously don't know, but just some things to think about, and hopefully people can still be vigilant to let their voices be heard. That this is what matters to us. This isn't just like you said, just throw the book at them. No, here it's making me scared to ride. It's making me whatever. Those kinds of personal feelings you have sounds like that's super important.
Yeah. Please kind of comment in that way to the elected district attorney. I think that will be meaningful.
Okay.
Show up to the extent that you can. Show support to the family. That will be meaningful.
Okay. Cool.
And don't wait either, because there will be some point in time when the test comes back, and there could be, depending on what the DA wants to do, there could be negotiations about what to do with the case. And so, don't just assume that if you're not hearing anything that nothing's going on. So,
Right.
if you want to make a comment to the elected district attorney, then don't put it off until 3 months down the road. Kind of do it now, but don't also just do it once. I mean, you can. I mean, don't be crazy about it. Like, don't email every 5 days or something, or every day or something.
Don't
like
Shawshank it.
that. Yeah, don't be crazy about it. But I think to the extent that the elected official can know that you're watching and that you care about it,
Right.
and that you're not forgetting about it, I think is very helpful. And it's, I mean, the elected official, should want to know that stuff. Like, they want to hear from the community. That's why they're elected, and
Right.
it's important. And I think there's people that assume that, well, they're not going to get my message, or they're not going to hear anything, and so they just don't even bother. But the elected official's like, well, I'm not hearing from anyone about this,
Right.
so
Right.
maybe people don't care as much, or maybe this person cares, but the community doesn't care. So they really need to hear from you so they can really assess what the community thinks about something like this.
Good to know. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
And good luck at your rides coming up. Then you got Steamboat Gravel, and
Yeah.
it sounds like you got a lot of stuff going on. So good
Yeah,
luck to
it'll be
that,
fun.
and thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks.